don't have to be a scientist to understand the impact of climate change on our daily lives. From the mounting intensity of hurricanes and tropical storms, to winter's blasting frigid winds well into the spring, the signs of climate crisis are seemingly everywhere. But one of the most intriguing indicators of climate change may also be one of the smallest. John Lill, associate professor of biology, began spotting caterpillars in his backyard weeks before they were expected. An expert in plant-insect interaction, he is here today to discuss with us how this change in one species' life cycle can impact an entire ecosystem of plants and animals. Welcome, John.
Thanks, glad to be here.
So let's jump right into this. What is it about plant-insect interaction that can tell us about climate change? And why is it that when caterpillars appear out of season, that's so important to this?
Well, many of the most ecologically important interactions that occur in nature, like those between plants and their pollinators, predators and their prey, or insects and their herbivores, are basically responsible for producing many of the ecosystem services that we rely upon as humans. And so understanding the way climate change is disrupting or influencing the timing of these interactions is particularly important. And what we're seeing is that many animals are responding to climate change. Some of them are advancing their timing, some are remaining the same, and some are even delaying things a bit. But all of these changes in timing are potentially disrupting the natural flow of interactions that can have effects on whole communities of organisms.
So what is happening to caterpillars as a result of climate change? And is there an impact for other animals or insects, even humans?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So the most obvious changes that are happening in response to climate that biologists have been documenting for decades are advances in their timing. So things are happening earlier, particularly in the spring. And this has been documented for an array of both plants and animals around the globe, but most often in sort of more temperate regions like North America. And what we're seeing is that when these advancements happen, either they're responding to warmer winters overall, or earlier springs, or both. And either one of those things can disrupt the timing of interactions that can occur. So for example, if caterpillars are advancing their timing and are showing up 3 weeks early, and their host plants that they require to feed upon are late or are on time, then their food source is potentially disrupted. And what we're really concerned about is when these disruptions occur, there are often additional impacts upon things like the predators of the caterpillar. So for example, around here, almost all of our spring songbirds rely upon this flush of caterpillars available for food to raise their nestlings in the spring. And if those caterpillars are out at a different time than the birds are typically are feeding their young, then there could be a disruption. So these knock-on effects that can occur on other species that are dependent upon these interactions can be particularly troubling.
So it's a cascade effect, it's a cascading effect. So let me ask you this. Why is it important to look at the broader plant-insect interaction, and what does this broad picture tell us?
What we're realizing, and have been for some time, is that communities are extremely interconnected. So there's an intrinsic web of interactions that's going on. And for years we've been documenting these shifts in individual species, components of these webs. But we're now moving towards is trying to understand climate change effects upon entire communities or webs of interactions. And when these webs get disturbed or altered significantly, there are often unpredictable effects. So things like outbreaks that can happen of forest pests that have agriculturally important, economically important effects on people as well as on ecosystems. Another example would be if the life cycle timing for pollinators was altered, then agricultural crops that rely upon pollinators may have lower yields than otherwise would occur without a climate-induced shift in the timing of these events.
Well, that's absolutely fascinating. So I have to ask, where are we now with the field of climate science? And we know that this is a burgeoning field. What types of resources are available for students, even study opportunities that might be available for them?
Yeah, so it's definitely getting a lot more attention from most of the federal agencies that fund this kind of research, including the National Science Foundation, which is where I rely upon for a lot of my funding. Many of us field biologists who have been working sometimes for decades on our particular system basically couldn't ignore the fact that our study systems were changing around us. So it was basically forced upon us to start thinking about and reevaluating the responses and long-term experiments and monitoring protocols in light of the changes that were occurring due to climate change. In terms of the funding opportunities, there definitely are more of them. So for example, I currently have some funding that was generously awarded through this new joint program between George Washington University and the Smithsonian that's enabled myself and some researchers from the Smithsonian to take a look at a natural plant pollinator web that occurs on Plummer's Island, which is a few miles north of here in the middle of the Potomac River. And what we've been trying to do is, besides just document the plant pollinator web on the island, is to move towards simulating the effects of removing one key species from those webs and the knock-on effects that occur for the entire community. So we can begin to understand what the consequences of losing a species that's vulnerable to climate change has on the community as a whole. The second line of investigation, which is more directly related to climate change effects on caterpillars, is being studied by my current PhD student, Mariana Abarca, who was given a prestigious fellowship from the National Park Service that is dedicated towards students that are researching climate change in national parks. So she's been traveling around the eastern US, visiting various national parks with the goal of trying to understand the effects of climate change on one of our most important and common signs of spring around here, which you can see right now around Washington, D.C. It's the eastern tent caterpillar that's found in association with native cherry trees. Her research is focused on understanding the responses of these tent caterpillars to changing climates throughout the eastern U.S.
John, that's fantastic, and congratulations on both of those awards for you and your student. Very soon, your lab and many of your colleagues will be moving into the Science and Engineering Hall at the George Washington University. Can you talk a little bit about what that move is going to mean for your research and projects?
Yeah, so we're very excited about this upcoming move. Certainly there's going to be state-of-the-art facilities enabling us to more precisely manipulate environmental factors, so including temperature as well as ambient light availability in the laboratory. And perhaps even more important is we rely pretty heavily on access to a really old greenhouse that we currently have on top of Bell Hall in Foggy Bottom. And we're very excited about the prospect of a brand new state-of-the-art greenhouse being built on the SEH. It's going to be really game-changing in terms of our ability to manipulate the important environmental cues that we're interested in. Also, having colleagues from chemistry, physics, and engineering are really going to add a new dimension in that I'll have new colleagues to interact with and bounce ideas off of, since they have expertise that I can share in.
Well, that's fantastic. I know we're definitely looking forward to that. I share that with you. Well, the impact of climate change is certainly a topic of our times, and only one that we've just started to explore with this conversation. Thank you, John, for your contributions to this field, and I congratulate you on all of your research.
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate your support.